We like to think of our lives as structured, protected, and meaningful. We build walls, invent technology, and convince ourselves that we are safe at the top of the food chain. But the truth is far more fragile. Human civilization is just a thin sheet of glass, and just beyond that glass lies a brutal, unfeeling, and ancient chaos. In December 1915, on the frozen, unforgiving frontier of Hokkaido, Japan, a small group of settlers learned exactly what happens when that glass shatters. This isn't just a story about an animal attack. This is a chronicle of a 5-day psychological nightmare, a period where a single 340-kilogram apex predator realized that the most dangerous species on Earth was actually nothing more than soft, defenseless meat. His name was Kesagak. And this is the timeline of the most horrific animal rampage in recorded history. To understand the horror, you have to understand the setting. In 1915, the village of Sankabetsu was not a modern town. It was a newly carved pioneer settlement, deeply embedded within the wild, impenetrable mountain forests of Hokkaido. The people living here were poor farmers. They spent their days clearing thick timber and trying to survive brutal sub-zero winters. Their homes were basic huts, built from wood, thatch, and walls woven from dried corn stalks. They were barely protected from the wind, let alone the wild, and that winter was unusually severe. Normally, by late November, the Ussuri brown bears of Hokkaido are deep underground, locked away in a months-long hibernation. But one bear didn't go to sleep. Kesagak was an Akage, a rogue, solitary giant. He had failed to secure enough food during the autumn months to sustain a winter-long sleep. Waking up in the freezing dark, driven completely mad by starvation, his biology gave him one single command: kill, eat, survive. In late November, Kesagak made his first approach to the village. He broke into a homestead, stealing harvested corn. The farmers, terrified by his sheer size, fired rifles into the air. The giant beast retreated into the dark trees. The villagers breathed a sigh of relief, assuming the noise had scared him off for good, or that he had finally gone to find a den. It was a fatal miscalculation. The gunshots hadn't scared Kesagake. They had only mapped out the village in his mind. He now knew exactly where the food was, and he knew the creatures inside those flimsy straw huts couldn't stop him. The true nightmare began on the morning of December 9th. The sun was up, casting a blinding white glare across the heavy snow. In the Ota family cabin, a young farmer's wife, Abe Mayu, was looking after a small child left in her care. Her husband was out working the fields. The cabin was completely quiet until the wall exploded. Kesagake didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. His massive frame tore right through the thatch wall of the cabin. What happened next inside those tight, claustrophobic walls is the stuff of pure psychological horror. The child was killed almost instantly by a single blow from a paw that carried thousands of pounds of force. Mayu tried to fight back. She grabbed a large fire iron, throwing it at the beast, trying desperately to defend the home. But against a 3-meter-tall monster driven by starvation, it was useless. Kesagake dragged Mayu out through the shattered wall, leaving a wide, violent trail of crimson across the pristine white snow. When the men of the village returned that evening, they walked into a slaughterhouse. The child's body lay on the floor. Mayu was gone. The village immediately formed a search party of 30 armed men. They followed the bloody trail deep into the pitch-black taiga. 100 meters into the woods, they found Kesagake, still guarding his kill. The men panicked and opened fire. In the chaos and the blinding snow, they managed to hit the bear, wounding him. But the pain only served to sever the last remaining threads of the animal's caution. Kesagake vanished into the dark thicket, leaving Mayu's remains behind. The hunters thought the wound would slow him down. They thought pain would make him run. They failed to realize they had just turned a hungry predator into an enraged, vengeful force of nature. By the next day, absolute panic had gripped Sankabetsu. The villagers knew the monster was still out there, bleeding and furious. They decided to consolidate their strength. The women, children, and elderly were moved to the sturdiest house in the area, the Mayoke family home. Meanwhile, a guard detail of armed men stationed themselves at the Ota cabin, betting that the bear would return to the site of his first kill. It was a logical plan, but Kasagak did not possess the mind of a simple animal. He possessed the terrifying, instinctual strategy of a seasoned hunter. He bypassed the heavily guarded Oda cabin completely. Instead, he slipped through the shadows of the blizzard, moving silently toward the Mayoki house. He knew exactly where the crowd was. He could smell them. At approximately 8 p.m., the guards at the Mayoki house heard a dull, rhythmic thudding on the roof. Kasagak was looking for a way in. Suddenly, the kitchen wall caved in. The fire was extinguished instantly, plunging the interior of the house into absolute terrifying darkness. The only sounds were the howling wind, the screams of children, and the heavy, wet breathing of a monster. What occurred over the next 20 minutes was an absolute massacre. A pregnant woman named Take, realizing her fate, begged the bear for the life of her unborn child. Her pleas meant nothing to the starving beast. Kasagake killed her ruthlessly, along with 3 young children who were trapped in the corners of the room. One young boy managed to escape into the blizzard, his screams alerting the armed guards who were stationed further down the road. By the time the armed men arrived and fired a volley of shots through the windows, the house was dead silent. Kasagake slipped out through the back wall, disappearing into the whiteout conditions of the storm. In less than 36 hours, a single animal had neutralized an entire community. Sankabetsu was no longer a village. It was a hunting ground. News of the Sankabetsu massacre reached the regional government, triggering a massive military response. A force of nearly 600 soldiers, police officers, and local volunteers was deployed to the mountains of Hokkaido. The village was completely evacuated. It was officially classified as a combat zone, but 600 men with rifles in a dense blizzard mean nothing if they cannot find the target. The bear was outsmarting them at every turn, using the thick brush and the heavy snowfall to mask his movements. He was a ghost. To kill a demon, they needed a specialist. Enter Yamamoto Heikichi. He was a legendary bear hunter, a rugged mountain man, and a decorated veteran of the Russo-Japanese War. Heikichi knew the Usuri brown bear better than any man alive. He understood their intelligence, their spite, and their lethal capabilities. When he looked at the tracks left by Kasagak, he didn't just see a large animal. He saw an incredibly intelligent, a hyper-aggressive aberration. Heikichi knew that a massive army of 600 shouting men would never catch this bear. The beast would hear them coming from miles away. Heikichi refused to join the massive search parties. Instead, he took just one single trusted hunting partner. They stepped away from the crowds, checked their ammunition, and walked quietly into the heart of the freezing, silent forest. They were going to hunt the butcher on his own terms. On the morning of December 14th, after days of tracking through waist-deep snow, Heikichi's instinct paid off. Near the summit of a mountain overlooking the ruined village, he spotted a massive dark shape resting beneath a giant gnarled oak tree. It was Kasagak. The giant was exhausted, his fur matted with dried blood from his previous wounds, but he was still alert. As Heikichi crept closer, a twig snapped. Kasagake's massive head whipped around. The bear looked directly at the hunter. The beast's ears went back, his muscles tensed, and he began to rise onto his hind legs, preparing for a final bone-crushing charge. But Heikichi was a soldier. His hands didn't shake. Before the bear could take his first step, the silence of the mountain was shattered. Heikichi fired. The first bullet tore cleanly through Kasagake's heart. The massive beast staggered, roaring in agony, but his sheer momentum kept him up. Heikichi didn't blink. He chambered a second round and fired again, striking the monster directly between the eyes. The giant collapsed into the snow. The terror of Sankabetsu was over. When the military engineers finally weighed the carcass, the numbers shocked the country. Kasagak stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed 340 kilograms. Inside his stomach, medical examiners found the horrific, undeniable proof of his crimes. The surviving villagers of Sankabetsu never rebuilt their homes. The psychological trauma was too deep. They packed up whatever belongings they had left and abandoned the settlement forever, leaving the empty huts to be slowly reclaimed and buried by the cold, indifferent forest. It stands as a grim, eternal reminder: we may build our cities, we may write our laws, and we may think we own this world, but we are only ever one winter, one broken wall, and one desperate predator away from being reminded exactly where we sit in the dark order of nature.